So I call this meeting to order. So welcome to meeting number 58 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security. We will start by acknowledging that we are meeting on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin people. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of November 25th, 2021. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. Pursuant to Standing Order 108, Sub 2, and the motion adopted by the committee on Friday, February 3rd, 2023, the committee resumed its study on the effects of the withdrawn amendments G4 and G46 to Bill C-21, an act to amend certain acts and to make certain consequential amendments firearms. Before we proceed, I would like to remind all members of the confidentiality of our working documents, such as notices of motion, briefing notes, working plans, and witness lists. According to the rules of the House of Commons, a breach of the confidentiality of our proceedings could be considered as a breach of parliamentary privilege by the committee. I thank everyone for their cooperation. Before we go into our witness panels, we will take a short segue into some other business as we wait for some technical difficulties to be ironed out. We have undertaken a report which we collectively call the Russia study, and we have examined it and I believe we're ready to approve it. So, there are 5 questions here for the committee to respond to. I don't know if, do I move these motions? Okay. So I'd ask the committee if the draft report as amended be adopted. All in favor? Opposed? Okay, adopted. And that the report be entitled Strengthening Canada's Security Posture in Relation to Russia. En français, peut relever le défi, renforcer le...
In French, strengthening the security posture of Canada with regard to Russia.
I believe the title is Up to the Task, strengthening Canada's security posture in relation to Russia. So I'm not sure what that translates to the French. I know he just didn't, okay. Just want to confirm.
That the report be entitled Up to the Task and so forth. Very well. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. That the chair, clerk, and analysts be authorized to make such grammatical and editorial changes as may be necessary without changing the substance of the report. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. That pursuant to Standing Order 109, the committee requests that the government table a comprehensive response to the report. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. That dissenting or supplementary opinions be in Calibri 12-point font, left-aligned, single-spaced, and be submitted electronically in both official languages to the clerk of the committee not later than 4 p.m. today. I believe there is one supplementary report, and it's already been submitted. So all in favor? Opposed? Carried. And that the chair present the report to the House. All in favor? Thank you. Opposed? The chair can't vote. Okay. Very well. Thank you all, and thank you all for all the great work on the committee, and thank the analysts for all of their enormous work as well on the committee. Yes, please.
Thank you very much. I just want to thank the SECU committee members who worked really hard on this. I know that there's a lot that we agree on and a lot that we disagree on, and I think that we collectively agree on this very important study, and I think it just speaks to the committee's ability to come together and collaborate on issues that we're unequivocally united on, and that's certainly putting a strong front in the face of Russian aggression and in solidarity with our Ukrainian friends and allies. And just very proud of the committee for coming together on this. And also would like to thank the analysts for their excellent work. It's a really wonderful read, actually. And all those little changes the few days ago we talked to, you implemented them perfectly. The things that needed to be further explained, sort of the industry jargon was explained really well with the last edits that you did. And I just thought, really commendable work. And you should be very proud of this as well. So thank you very much for your hard work. And thank you, Mr. Chair, as well.
Thank you all, and thanks once again to the analysts, without whom we'd be dead. Madame Demoff, please.
That's an understatement. I have something else, Chair, that just to deal with very quickly. But before I move on to that, I just want to give a thank you to MP Dancho for bringing this study forward and her leadership on it. It really is a good study, and we wouldn't have done it without her leadership. So thank you for that. I want to propose, Chair, that the committee visit the RCMP gun vault here in Ottawa. And if it's agreeable with members, we could use committee time. I'll leave that up to the clerk and to you, Chair, to figure out the best date to do it before we're finished these, before we get back to clause by clause. So I'm hoping that there's committee agreement for us to do that.
Thank you. I'll take that as a motion. Moved. Are we all in favor? Go ahead.
Certainly support committee excursions. I don't think we've done any in the year and a half that I've been on this committee. So, and certainly I think seeing firsthand firearms and getting that knowledge would be important, and visiting the gun vault I think would add to that. As far as the timing goes, I support the motion, but I'm not sure what the timing would look like if we have three, including today. If you include today, we have 3 consultation meetings, and then I would assume that we were going back to clause by clause. So would that mean it would be 4 more meetings and then clause by clause? Like, would we use an existing committee time to do that excursion, or how would that work?
I think we would take extra time to do that excursion, and fit it in wherever is reasonable to do so.
That may be short timing then, because if we end our consultations, Chair, on a Friday, our next meeting is the following Tuesday. I know Monday that I'm unavailable in the evening. I know, anyway, I'm just not wanting to put us in a box, but we are supportive of going.
Right. So my concept of this was that we would take, say, a Tuesday meeting slot and do this. These facilities are nearby during meeting time, and hopefully we can arrange transport through the House if we approve it as a committee, right? And I don't know, maybe the House can approve at lunch. No commitments. Ms. DeMoth, please.
Thanks, Chair. Or it's a $10 Uber ride, so we can all share an Uber to get there. And also, we come back the week of the 20th, and we still have to hear 1 hour with the minister. So in my head, I was thinking the 21st we could go and then have the minister on the 24th, but I don't want to box us in on that. So we can leave it to the chair and clerk to figure that out. And if the House can't provide transportation, I think it's a pretty short trip to get there.
I guess, sorry. I haven't been recognized, but I suppose our caveat is that we use a committee time slot to do it. I think that we're all available at that time. So
I'm led to understand that excursions of this kind while the House is sitting are kind of problematic, and the House may or may not approve it, but I think we should ask. So I'm going to propose, Mr. Numahan, I'm going to propose the motion which I believe Ms. DeMoff has offered, that in relation to the study of the effects of the withdrawn amendments G4 and G46 to Bill C-21, the committee visit a Royal Canadian Mounted Police facility located in the National Capital Region, and that the clerk of the committee, in consultation with the chair, prepare a draft budget for consideration by the committee on March 7th. Right?
Sounds just like what I said.
Exactly. That's what I heard. Is everyone in agreement with this?
I haven't seen the motion, but it sounds fine.
I'll share it with you.
Fernand Michaud wants
I keep hurrying to the vote and forgetting the debate. So, Madame Michaud, c'est à vous, si vous voulez.
Non,
No, thank you. I didn't want to take the floor, but thank you for this suggestion, and I agree with it. I don't know if the date has been set. I didn't quite hear.
Sorry, I missed everything you said.
vous me
Yeah. You were asking if there are any questions about the motion? Do we have a date set? Because I think it's a good suggestion. And was it the 7th of March that you suggested?
I mentioned the 7th of March
Okay.
for preparing a budget or signing off on a budget. Otherwise, there's no specific date in the motion. The idea being that we would schedule it in as whatever works for the schedule and whatever works with the House. Okay. Any further discussion? Seeing none, and I keep forgetting all my colleagues online here, so I apologize if I'm missing all your hands waving at me. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? All opposed? Carried. Well, thank you all. So now we can proceed to the business, and I thank our witness for hanging in there with us. So we are short a witness, I think, and one of our witnesses, I think, is maybe the clerk could fill us in on this situation here.
Miss Wendy Cocker right now has issue to connect, so I'm waiting to hear from her. And Mr. Landlois has a sound okay for he can deliver his testimony this morning, but apparently the sound was not perfect, so I might have signed from the interpretation services that we have an issue, but I think we can go ahead with Mr. Landlois.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Clerk. So we'll carry on with our study, and if technical difficulties make it impossible to continue, we will have to consider suspending and possibly rescheduling this particular witness. Anyway, today we have 2 panels of witnesses. They'll probably have time for about 45 minutes a panel. So with the first hour by video conference, we have only Madame Couquier.
She has an issue that is him.
Our witness, Madame Couquier, president of the Coalition for Gun Control, is having trouble connecting. But we have online, as an individual, Mr. Francis Langlois, professor and associate researcher, Observatoire sur les États-Unis of the Raoul Dandurand Chair of Strategic and Diplomatic Studies. So let us start with Monsieur Langlois. Your 5-minute statement, please.
Je tiens à remercier les...
I would like to thank the members of the committee for having invited me, and I sent a document, and I have, if the document has been distributed, it contains my recommendations, but I will also make my recommendations orally. I have 2 recommendations to make. First of all, to change how we classify firearms in order to avoid semantic discussions on the issue of what is an assault rifle and what's a hunting weapon. And in order to avoid that, I would propose a new classification based on how they are handled, used, how you hold them, and secondly, concerning their firing mechanism. And so I'm going to go into these 2 issues a bit later. And I'd also like to suggest that we broaden the definition of what's a firearm in order to avoid the proliferation of ghost weapons, ghost firearms. Right now, guns have a serial number on the grip or the stock, and that is something that is very easy. The stock is something that's very easy to make, or if that were added to the barrel or the breech, that would be a way of limiting these ghost weapons. For example, the polymer 80 weapon, which are often bought from the United States, and that's what I want to talk to you about. I also have some pictures in my presentation, but basically I want to describe to the committee a new way of categorizing firearms first, and then secondly to discuss how the guns are held and handled, whether you use one hand or two hands, and two hands on the grip. That's a handgun. If that handgun is held in both hands and there's one on the grip and one to the front, so that's for a long rifle. There's one hand on the stock and one on the barrel, and there's also the firing mechanism. If it's manual, for long rifles, there could be a lever that reloads, or there also could be a pump action gun. If the weapon is self-loading, the firing cycle is done automatically by the weapon each time you pull the trigger, whether it be semi-automatic or automatic. So by using these different categories, the law will be more coherent, and this will avoid semantic discussions about what's a firearm or an assault rifle. Thank you.
We start with Mr. Lloyd. 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Langlois, you retweeted a New York Times article recently that the title being "A Smarter Way to Reduce Gun Deaths." And I took a read through the article, and the thesis seemed to be that governments need to focus less on the firearms themselves and more on the people using them, and that liberals, in the case in the United States, are focused too much on banning certain kinds of firearms and less on a, quote, panoply of other interventions that could be more effective at reducing gun violence. Do you agree broadly with the thesis of this essay?
Thank you for sorry. Thank you for the question. Yes, the main thing is, of course, prevention is more efficient. That being said, it depends on the objective of the government, and if the objective is to reduce mass shootings, perhaps terrorism too, I would say what the government for the moment calls military-style assault rifle are the preferred weapons used by mass shooters. If you prefer self-loading weapons, semi-automatic pistols or rifles are the most used weapon to do mass shootings. So if the governments want to reduce mass shootings, that's a way to reduce the accessibility of those weapons. That being said, I think you are right. We have to, as a society, address the causes of violence in Canadian cities and, well, issues of mental health and those issues, I agree. But again, depends on the objective of the government.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the witness for that. Another quote from the article said, and this is for the committee, this is in the American context, but quote, "What we call assault rifles probably account for fewer than 7% of guns used in crimes and only a small share of suicides, and they have proved repeatedly difficult to define," end quote. Mr. Langlois, you might be aware, but recent Statistics Canada report that came out just in December, a couple of months ago, said that in terms of violent crimes in Canada, a rifle or a shotgun, a long gun, was only present at 0.47% of all violent crimes. Would you agree that long guns in the Canadian context are far less involved in violent crimes than the American context, and that they form such a small minority of crimes committed in Canada that they're present at?
Thank you again for the question. I think you are right. Long guns are not usually used to commit crime. But again, it depends what the government wants to do first. And also what I propose here is to classify weapons differently. So you use the expression assault weapon. Well, it's very difficult to define an assault weapon. I think the law should categorize the weapons or firearms by the way they are handled and the way, or manipulated if you want, and the way they shoot, and semi-automatic weapons, self-loading weapons with detachable magazines are way more dangerous.
Thank you for that.
Mass shootings.
If a government were trying to, create as much political blowback as possible, would that government go after hunting guns and long guns? Like, is that something that you would agree would create the most political division in a country like Canada?
I won't. Well, I think you're the politicians. I'm not. So I'm giving you my opinion on how we should categorize the weapons. Of course, I think a lot of people will not be happy. That being said, with the current law and categorization, a lot of people are not happy. So it's up to you to decide. I think politics is the art of the choice.
And the choice to go after long guns that could include hunting guns, do you think that this choice is more of a political choice, or would this actually have a significant impact on public safety?
It would have a significant impact on public security, even if the weapon we're talking about are not used very often in crime. You know, mass shootings are lower frequency but high intensity events. So that's the main problem with those weapons.
You're an expert in American gun culture. You know, we've had some witnesses that say, if we don't pass these amendments, we're going to become just like the United States. I mean, we know at this committee, and Canadians know, gun owners know, Canada has far more robust and restrictive firearms policy than the United States. Wouldn't you agree with that?
You're absolutely right. The law is way stronger here than in the United States.
So would you agree that there's really no risk of us becoming similar to the United States just because the amendments at this committee didn't pass?
I think you're probably right. That being said, the industry is pushing for new models of weapons to be sold here and everywhere in the world, and those weapons may be quite dangerous. Well, we know what happens south of the border, and a lot of those weapons are going even south, even in Mexico and South America. So we see what is happening over there. So let's not permit the industry to distribute this, those semi-automatics, long rifle.
Thank you, Mr. Lloyd. So Ms. Couquier is online. However, I'm going to suggest to her, we can't get a hold of her by phone, that she join the next panel, because we've started this one and it kind of... I see a cent there. Good. Okay, so we'll move Madame Couquier into the next panel. Well, because you guys have your question slot already. And you're fine with that? Okay, well, in that case, if everyone's okay with that, Madame Couquier, if you would like to give your 5-minute presentation, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me all right?
Yep.
Okay. And my apologies. The test went perfectly, and the real performance did not. So I'm representing the Coalition for Gun Control, which, as many of you know, is a network of 200 healthcare, violence prevention, and community organizations that's been working for more than 30 years to advance stronger gun control. I'm also a professor at Toronto Metropolitan University, formerly known as Ryerson. I've published a book called The Global Gun Epidemic and a number of articles focused on the public health perspective. I wanted to start by saying that the proposed legislation, Bill C-21, in our view is groundbreaking and addresses gaps in Canadian gun laws. It's an important step in bringing our legislation in line with other industrialized countries by reducing the chances of people who are dangerous to themselves or others will get access to guns. That's the strengthening of the licensing provisions will stem the proliferation of handguns, which is critically important, and also support the ban on military-style semi-automatic firearms. We know that in Canada and around the world, most mass shootings, killings of police officers, domestic violence incidents, and suicides are typically with by legal gun owners or with firearms that were at one time legally owned. And the question about long guns is important because we see that long guns are typically used to kill women in domestic violence situations. They're more common in suicides and in certain other kinds of crime. You don't see them as often, for example, in gang-related violence. So the first point that I really wanted to make to the committee is that this legislation is critically important, and we really feel that most Canadians are expecting it to be passed as quickly as possible. The proposed amendments, which are the focus of the discussion here, are really intended, as you know, to fill some gaps that were identified with the use of orders in council to prohibit firearms. And I'll reference a report we did comparing legislation around the world, 3 basic approaches to prohibiting military weapons, which most industrialized countries do. I think comparing us to the United States is a mistake. We need to set our standards higher and compare ourselves to Europe, Australia, New Zealand. But most countries, most industrialized countries do prohibit military-style semi-automatic firearms. They do it in one of 3 ways or a combination. They define specific characteristics. Centerfire accepts a large capacity magazine, other military characteristics, and they define a list of specific makes and models. The challenge with the first approach is that often the interpretation varies. And that's why having the specificity of lists like the orders in council is helpful. The limitation of relying on orders in council is manufacturers are very innovative in terms of coming up with new makes and models to circumvent the lists. And so some countries use both. And that's part of the reason why I believe the amendment was introduced to help fill some of those gaps. Some countries also flip this entirely and put the onus on the manufacturers to get approval. So they publish lists of guns that are allowed, that are legal, and anything else is assumed to be illegal until it's formally approved. We think that the proposed amendments are helpful, and we hope that the committee will find a way to address both the misinformation by making clear that these are not intended to affect firearms reasonably used in hunting. In fact, it's only about 150 of the firearms on the new list that are currently unrestricted weapons and likely to be used for hunting. And also to remember that because a firearm is used for hunting doesn't make it a hunting firearm. And we have lots of evidence over the last 30 years of people saying that a firearm is used for hunting, and then on further investigation, it's clear that it has characteristics that would classify it as a military-style firearm. I think the final point that I wanted to make is simply that Indigenous peoples do have a right to hunt. There are non-derogation clauses, but there may need to be some special considerations with respect to the application of the amendment, as there was with the OICs. And I would just ask the committee to put public safety at the priority. It's true that military-style semi-automatic firearms are not often used in crime, but when they are used, the impacts are devastating. And most Canadians and most experts, and in fact most industrialized countries around the world, recognize that these firearms serve no legitimate purpose in the hands of civilians. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gouquier. We'll go now to Madame Damoff. 5 minutes, please. Sorry, 6 minutes.
Thank you. My question is for both of you, actually. Professor Cukier, you brought up Indigenous peoples. The 2020 Order in Council prohibiting assault-style firearms included an exemption for Indigenous peoples exercising their Section 35 hunting rights. I'm just wondering if you could both comment if you think it would be a good idea for us to include something similar in Bill C-21.
Yes.
Thank you.
I think that there has been some misinformation, but I do think that Indigenous peoples, unlike other segments of the population, have obviously a right to hunt. One might question whether they have a right to hunt with semi-automatic military-style firearms, but I think it would be prudent to make clear that this is not intended to infringe upon their rights.
Professor Langlois?
Thank you. I agree with Professor Coutier. I think it should be clear that there is no intent to infringe on First Nations hunting rights. That being said, it should be also clear that military-style assault rifle should be more regulated if they're not, and at least registered to the name of the owner if they at the end of this process they still are available in Canada, because this is not an issue of discrimination. I mean, Australia doesn't have a special regime concerning firearm regulation for their First Nations, so I think it's important to apply the law for everyone.
Thank you. And to both of you again, and I'll start with you perhaps this time, Professor Langlois, do you think that the government should have what we've called an evergreen definition of these military-style assault weapons, or whatever you want to call them, in the criminal code?
I think, I think so, yes. I wouldn't call them assault-style, military-style assault weapons. I would call them self-loading semi or automatic weapons. So using the way they work, the mechanic of the weapon to classify them instead of the length of the barrel. I think it would be clearer, easier to amend, to work with, because to define military-style assault weapon seems a bit elastic for some or too restrictive for others. So it should be, yes, there should be, the law should be amended.
And Professor?
Yeah, I think that there is, as other witnesses have mentioned, less clarity around semi-automatic military-style weapons than, for example, fully automatic weapons, although there have been court cases that indicated that even that term was subject to interpretation, and the courts interpreted the ban on fully automatic weapons as including firearms capable of fully automatic fire. So these definitional issues are not new. My caution is to ensure the precision. And that's why, we like the language about not reasonably used for hunting, because we do know there are semi-automatic firearms that are widely used for hunting, were designed as hunting rifles, have don't have large capacity magazines associated with them and so on. And so our concern is not to spread too wide a net, yet at the same time to fulfill the obligation and to the Canadian people of protecting them from firearms which serve no legitimate purpose in the hands of civilians.
Thank you. And my remaining time, I'm going to turn over to Mr. Chang.
Thank you, MP Ben Demoff, and good morning. I'd like to thank the witnesses for being with us here today. My question is directed to both of you, if you could answer me. When creating a definition for assault weapons here in Canada, we have heard concerns about guns reasonably used for hunting caught up in the amendments. How do you propose we address firearms that seems to be on the wrong side of whatever definition we create moving forward? Professor Cookier, if you could start first.
Sure. And as I mentioned, we reviewed the list of the new firearms that will be affected by this definition and identified, I think it was about 115, 117 that are currently unrestricted. That means that those 117 firearms are perhaps currently used for hunting because they have not been in the past restricted or prohibited. So certainly those firearms require some additional scrutiny. The only thing that I would say we've observed with sniper rifles, for example, in the Ruger Mini 14, that there are unrestricted firearms which are not reasonably used for hunting, but have been unrestricted simply because of failures to address gaps in the legislation. But I do think the only legitimate arguments that can be brought forward relate to that set of firearms, and there may be a different approach that's required for them. I do want to underscore that we have seen, as you heard from other witnesses, many cases of people posing with their hunting rifles and saying, this law is impeding my livelihood or whatever. And on further investigation, it's clear that that firearm, in fact, is not caught in this definition or in the list.
Thank you,
Again,
Mr. Chang.
Sorry.
It's okay. Thank you. We'll go now to, on y va maintenant, Madame.
We'll now go to Ms. Michaud. Go ahead. 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here. It's very good of you to accept our invitation. And Mr. Longlot, the first time I heard you, you classified, when you talked about a different way of classifying firearms, I was very interested. And in an article in La Presse with regard to the withdrawal of the two amendments, you said that you were not surprised that the amendments were withdrawn, and you thought that the government made two mistakes with this file. And could you tell us what these mistakes were, in your opinion? Thank you very much for the question, Ms. Michaud. The first mistake, I think, was that an error of form, to the extent that the government suggested these amendments on a second reading, as if they just pull them out of a magician's hat. And of course, this is a surprise for many people and even members of the committee, and I think it was badly handled. And the committee's or the government's response was that this was added after the Portapique tragedy, when the government decided in an order in council to restrict access to hundreds of models of military-style assault rifles at that time. And I think that the way it was done was not the right one. And I think that the two amendments, the definition of what qualifies as a military-style assault rifle is difficult to apply and implement and hard to justify. It's rather complicated. And then the list as well, it was very, very long, about 100 pages. And I think that was certainly a very complete list, and there are a lot of weapons on the list. And the problem with that kind of a list is that the industry will always try to get around the law by being very strict with the definitions, and could come out with new types of weapons that just get around the rules. And this would be require new work on the part of legislators. Thank you very much. I agree with you with regard to the list. And what I've understood in my questions with officials is that every time there's a new model that comes out, it would have to be there would have to be an amendment to the law, and it's not necessarily because when the police, for example, see a new arm and whether they know whether it's legal or not, they're going to update the RCMP list. And those are the kinds of lists that we should use. And why not have a list in the criminal code? Why not just put in the RCMP list that's updated? And why not? Why should we end up with a number of different lists? And I think that there are also exempted weapons that are on the list. So I think that if we end up with a number of lists, that will add to the confusion, and we can understand people if they see all these amendments and lists, and with regard to the 2020 regulations that are in effect, and all gun owners probably consulted the list in 2020, and when they want to renew permits, will they have to go by the list, or will it be a new definition that would include future arms coming onto the market? Thank you for the question. That's what I was getting to. The government should create a new classification system that would include the existing models and possible future models. And I have a lot of ideas in that regard. And I don't know if we have to ban everything. I think we have to have a certain way of classifying the weapons, and that can be used as the basis for whether or not it should be prohibited or restricted. And we base that decision on the classification criteria. And so there may be as well some weapons that could be exempted because of a particular category that they're put in. But I think we have to better classify them. And secondly, the multiplication of lists, you're quite right, it's a problem. And there are arms that have been used by criminals, and there are other arms, and then there are other lists. And I think there are, in 2015, in the Harper government, the government took the RCMP list and moved some weapons to the unrestricted list, and there's a possibility of maneuvers like that by various parties or governments, and I think that's problematical. Thank you very much. We now are going to Boulouris, 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair. It's a pleasure to be here with you to discuss this challenge, which is a significant one, because as a Quebecois and somebody from Montreal, we've had tragedies, and lately there have been incidents, violent incidents in some neighborhoods, shots near schools, and so it's a concern. And when we talk about the health and safety of our communities, our citizens, and I agree with Mr. Langlois that the amendments just appeared at the last minute, and I don't think it was a good way to proceed. That led to a lot of confusion, especially with for people who are legitimate hunters and who were surprised. And I think this was poorly handled by the government. And Mr. Langlois, I'm going to come back to your two proposals. First of all, modifying how we classify firearms based on how they're held and how they fire. What difference would that make, this new category that you're proposing relative to the existing category classification system? Thank you. What I'm suggesting is that the way they are held and handled, first of all, to separate handguns from rifles or long guns. And in the document that I sent to the committee, I think all handguns, if the government decides that they are going to be allowed in Canada, I think they should go into the restricted carry, and there should be a verification of ownership, whatever kind of firing mechanism they have. That's for all handguns. But the problem currently is that the situation of long guns or rifles, often used for hunting, and there are also civil versions of military assault rifles that are semi-automatic and that are currently on the market. And so this kind of weapon is a problem because they are very much appreciated by mass killers, but also because they give increased firepower to any individual. And given their caliber and these kind of long guns held with two hands and powerful should also be classified by the firing mechanism. And do you have is it have to be reloaded manually with a lever, with a pump, or is there another mechanism? And if only a handful of shots can be loaded, I think they could remain non-restricted. But if the weapon is semi-automatic or automatic self-loading, then the government should put them all in the restricted category. And then if they want to ban them, that's a decision they will have to take. And as we heard, there's the issue of weapons that are often used by hunters, weapons that are semi-automatic, self-loading. And there, the government, once these weapons have been classified, if they have a certain limited number of shots, or then they're in a permissible, or if they have a high capacity magazines or changeable magazines, then they're in a more restricted category. Even though these types of magazines can be obtained on the market illegally and also printed by 3D measures. And so that's a way of categorizing things more coherent than the current system. And are you concerned by the 3D printers that can make handguns, and that they've completely transformed the handgun market? Yes, it's a growing problem in North America. And the problem with these objects is that there is no trace of them because they are not. They don't have no serial number, and currently we have a serial number on the grip, and that can be a way of getting around the law. Whether you have a pistol or a rifle, you have to broaden the definition of what is a firearm. You have to take into account the barrel and the breech and have serial numbers. And just as is done in Germany, for example, this would help reduce the proliferation of these ghost weapons. And of course, there's also imports of polymer 80 that under American law, they're not complete weapons. They're legal in the United States, and they can be produced in the United States. And I think it's very popular here in Canada by people who want to procure this kind of unidentified weapon. Thank you very much.
We have time now for an abbreviated second round. We'll do 4 minutes each for the Liberals and Conservatives, 2 minutes each for the Bloc and the NDP. Go ahead, please, Ms. Dancho. 4 minutes.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the witnesses for being here. Ms. Cukier, I have a few questions regarding some of the remarks you made. I appreciate your testimony, and I recognize and appreciate the work that you've done throughout your life regarding these issues. But you had mentioned that most mass killings, police officer murders, and spousal homicides are by legal gun owners. Can you provide where that data is from?
Yeah. It's legal gun owners or legal firearms. So if you look at the police officers killed over the last 40 years, what you will find is most of them are actually killed in contexts where the guns were legally held.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you. I'm having a hard time hearing you, but I can hear you now with my headphones. So I didn't hear the beginning of what you said.
Sorry, yes. If you look at and I can provide the information, if you look at the incidents of police officers shot and killed in Canada over the last 50 years, what you will find is most of them are killed with guns that were either legally owned or originated with legal owners. So, for example, in Mayerthorpe.
So you mentioned, sorry, just to interrupt. So you mentioned, police officers, but what you had said was legal gun owners were the primary source
by
of
legal
murders.
gun owners or with legally guns that were legally owned.
Oh, so stolen from a legal owner, you're saying?
Yes, but the point is that the legal supply of firearms.
Pardon me, ma'am. Where did you get that information? Was it Stats Canada? Was it where is that information from that we can look at it?
If you review case by case police officers shot and killed in Canada, I provided it to previous committees, and the same is true with mass shootings in Canada.
I'm sorry, ma'am. So you're saying it's your personal research that's found that?
It's research based on the list of police officers shot and killed in Canada.
That you personally did yourself. Is that correct?
Yes.
And was that peer reviewed by anybody, your research?
It's been submitted to the committee. It was prepared specifically
Thank
for
you,
the
ma'am. No, I
mass
appreciate that.
casualty.
Was your personal research peer reviewed by anyone?
It was submitted. It was prepared for the mass
Thank
casualty
you very much. You also
commission.
mentioned, just to continue, you also mentioned that legal gun owners are most responsible for spousal homicide. Do you have that data you can provide to us?
Yes, that data is from the Femicide Observatory.
I'm sorry, it's from where?
The Femicide Observatory.
Okay, and what information do they use? Is that from Stats Canada? Is that a Canadian company or?
It's based on the data with respect to spousal homicides, looking case by case at the weapon that was used and the circumstances.
And is that from Stats Canada that they?
Stats Canada doesn't have that data or provide that data because they don't have information on the legal status of the firearm.
Okay, so
you have to do case by case analysis to get this information.
And how long? And so they have that observatory. Is that a peer reviewed organization, or where are they getting their information? My point being, ma'am, is that I find I'm just reviewing all of your remarks that you provided to committee, and I'm not seeing statistically sound evidence that you've provided, and I do find that concerning, given the claims that you're making. You've said that. First of all, legal gun owners are most responsible for mass homicide, spousal homicide, and for killing of police officers. And yet I'm not satisfied, based on what you're sharing with me today, that your information has been peer-reviewed or is supported by evidentiary and sound statistical data. And I'm looking at some data from Stats Canada myself that said, oh, okay, sure, we're done.
Madam Couquet, if you'd like
4
a very
minutes
quick
goes
response,
fast,
go ahead.
Mr. Chair.
What's that?
So that 4
Sure, I'm
minutes
happy
goes
to
fast.
provide the references and the citations to the committee.
That would be greatly appreciated.
Yeah,
Happily.
if you have that information, you'd like to send it in to the committee, that would be very much appreciated. Thank you very much.
Happy to.
We go now to Mr. Nur Mohammed. Mr. Mohammed, 4 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. And I'm, given the shortness of time, I'm going to try and be brief in my questioning. I just want to thank the witnesses for being here. Dr. Cookie, I just wanted to go back to you because you were cut off a couple of times answering very interesting questions from my colleague, Ms. Dancher. So I just wanted to give you the opportunity to finish the answer that you were trying to give. What evidence did you use to come up to the conclusion that it was a legal supply of firearms that resulted in the types of murders that you spoke of? Can you speak specifically to the type of data and the quality of that data to allay any fears or concerns that folks might have that somehow these are just made up numbers, or that somehow people are pulling stats that are convenient out of the air? Can you just speak to the strict facts of the matter?
Sure. So there are different sources of data that you can use as researcher. One is you rely on Stats Canada data, and we have certainly pulled that data and analyzed it for overall patterns, but Stats Canada data does not provide contextual information about specific cases or sources of firearms in specific cases. So if you're interested in doing that kind of research, you have to go through the painstaking process of pulling the cases and doing research case by case on the information that's available about the source of firearm, the context, and whether the gun was legally owned or not. And that's the work that we've been doing for many, many years. And that's the work that was presented and requested by the Mass Casualty Commission that recently concluded. So we have all that data, and it was presented to the Commission along with other expert reports.
Okay, thank you very much.
It has not been published yet or peer-reviewed.
Understood. Okay, thank you very much. Je vais demander à vous, Professeur Langlois.
Professor Langlois, with regard to your research into the need to remove assault rifles from the market, and there have been incidents in many communities. I want to ensure that we're dealing correctly with the assault type of weapons, as well as illegal ones, or the parts that can be imported.
Our police officer friends about making sure that in the prevention of the building of ghost guns, that barrels, slides, and trigger assemblies are regulated. Can you speak a little bit about why that's important and what you think the best vehicle for us to make sure that happens is?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Nur Mohammed. Yes, so why the slides, the barrel, and other components of firearms should be regulated? Because the most popular form of handguns right now, unless they are fully printed or uniquely with a unique design, what is the most popular type of firearm are copies of Glock pistol or very similar pistols, because all the other components beside the lower receiver are easily available legally, either in Canada or in the United States. And those pistols who are, I would say, who have the lower receivable printed with polymer are called polymer 80s because they are 80, according to the American law, they are not ready at a sufficient level to be considered as a firearm. So anybody can do this kind of unfinished weapon and send them through the mail. And it seems they are very popular here in Canada. A young man was arrested nearby Dundee in Quebec. He had with him 249 polymer 80 pistols. They were Glock, imitation of Glock pistols. And the idea is to bring them in and then buy or get the other components that are made of metal. And this can be bought separately and is not considered as a firearm. So what I recommend is that
Merci, monsieur.
all those... Oh, sorry. Thank you.
Merci. Madame Michaud, c'est à vous maintenant 2 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, monsieur.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm going to concentrate on two questions for Mr. Langlois. I'll be brief so he can answer. And with regard to classification and the handling and the firing mechanism, do you think that there could be an amendment that would introduce this classification, even if the firearm is in the prohibited or restricted category? Do you think that that would be possible? I think you have a good idea, but I'd like to hear you. And with regard to G4, I think the entire amendment was not bad. There were confusing parts, however, especially when in French it said hunting rifle semi-automatic. Do you think that could cause confusion and a removable magazine with 5 bullets? Do you think that it would have been preferable to put, for example, more than 5 cartridges to try and define the type of weapon? So if you could give your opinion. Thank you very much, Ms. Michaud. So with regard to the categorization, I think that it would be possible to change the law, the criminal code, by keeping prohibited, restricted, and unrestricted. And rather than classifying weapons on the length of the barrel or other differences, for example, the Dawson weapon was a Beretta, which was unrestricted, but a few centimeters shorter. It's nevertheless it's 9mm removable magazine, and of course that's the firing mechanism. Is it a handgun or is it a long gun, manual or automatic or semi-automatic loading? That's a more coherent classification system. Thank you. Sorry. Thank you very much.
Madame, on y va maintenant à Monsieur Boulris.
Now to Mr. Boulris. 2 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair. With regard to the difficulty of getting lists and with makers who will try and develop new models to get around the definitions of the weapons on the list, I wonder if you could tell us what can we do? Do we have to adjust them? Or do we have to have a list that's more vague but could include all of them?
La question est pour qui?
Pour Madame Krug.
It's for Ms. Cookier first. Thank you very much.
Um, in my view, you need a combination. You establish the principle in the legislation and you provide the lists. And as I said, in my view, we have a firearms reference table that was developed many years ago. I don't know if it's been kept up to date, but even though internet access may be a problem, I think there are easier mechanisms to allow gun owners to be able to search and find out if their gun is how their gun is categorized. So I think we need both the list for the specificity and we need the language in the legislation to articulate the principle that we're not addressing guns reasonably used in hunting. We're looking at centerfire semi-automatics that were designed to accept a large capacity magazine and or have other military characteristics, which is consistent with definitions in many countries around the world.
Merci. Un mot là-dessus.
Thank you very much. Mr. Langlois, anything to say?
Je pense que
I think that my colleague is right. More tools we have, more effective the system will be. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you.
So that wraps up our questions for this panel. I'd like to thank both our witnesses for your excellent assistance today. It's most helpful to our study. And with that, we will suspend and bring in the next panel. Thank you all.
Thank you for your patience.
This is our second panel, and with us today, in person we have Aventure Chasse Pêche, Monsieur Martin Bourget, President, Madame Kate Nadeau-Mercier, General Manager, and with us by video conference we have, as an individual, Mr. Matthew Hipwell, President, Wolverine Supplies. So welcome to you all. We will start with 5 minutes statements from each group. So I would invite Aventure Chasse Pêche to make a statement of up to 5 minutes. Thank you.
Alors, je me présente, Martin.
My name is Martin Bourget. I'm president of Aventure Chasse Pêche, which is a magazine and program and for hunting and fishing, and I also do technical reviews of firearms, and I've done a great deal of video and written press presentations for major arms manufacturers, and we go out to sites across Canada and the world 52 weeks a year. We are in rural, isolated areas with other hunters and fishers, and I think that we have a great deal of experience, and our community is very concerned because they see that we are associated with criminal acts, and then the abuse of firearms that in crimes. And I think that there are problems of psychological or mental health, and these people can commit crimes with weapons that have been identified as legitimate, have been identified, but are nevertheless illegal to own. So there's a great deal of confusion if we look at all the proposals from the government that seem quite arbitrary, and it's difficult to imagine that these measures would really protect streets in Canada, especially when you know the source of the reasons for these crimes. And when we look at the list of weapons and the things like the length of the barrel, there's even more confusion because there's a great deal of incoherence. And owners, firearm owners in Canada, are very confused, even with the process that we're going through right now. And we would like to see a study on the relevance of this for safety and the effect on the traditional activities of hunting and fishing. On my side, this is a milieu in which I've been working, and our community is threatened and possibly criminalized. I'm not only the general director of Aventure Chasse Pêche, more than we are watched and read around the world, and I represent 26,000 women who love nature, and they practice their values. They are mothers, and they also raise their children to respect nature, and they are very concerned by the economic effects of these measures, and must be more care taken in trying to limit these arms, and the industry was very severely affected by measures to control these weapons. The will to protect citizens and the measures that the government is trying to implement are something that creates a great deal of fear in the firearm owning community. We believe that the law should be completely rewritten or even abandoned to be replaced with something else.
Merci.
Merci.
On y va maintenant.
Thank you. We're now going to
Good morning, Mr. Chair and committee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to all you before regarding Bill C-21, the amendments G4, G46. And anyway, I'd like to just go back a little bit in time for myself here. I'm an immigrant to Canada. I moved here in early of 1982 with my parents and grew up in the Verdun area. So I've always been a Manitoba resident, rural and primarily in the rural area. I grew up in a shooting family, a hunting family, and that involved competitive pistol shooting at a younger age all the way through and has led me to compete and shoot across Western Canada. I've represented Manitoba in the sport of biathlon and Canada Winter Games. So shooting's always been a part of my life, my family's life, and now my family. So following college, I spent a short stint in the Canadian Armed Forces, and then where I spent the first part of my career with the RCMP. Spent nearly 16 years in the RCMP across Manitoba. That included uniform policing, plainclothes policing in the drug unit, where I encountered various number of firearms in drug-related offenses. Saw firearms in different communities depending on the type of policing work that I came across. I specialized during my career with the emergency response team. So obviously that deals with high risk situations where you're dealing with armed and barricaded and all types of other violent offenses, firearms included, but not necessarily just firearms. On the training side, as part of that, I became a use of force instructor and a firearms instructor. So that led me to teach various police officers across the country in pistol, shotgun, rifle use, patrol carbine use, and even was guest instructor at the Canadian Police College on search warrant execution. So following a transfer and a relocation to Western Manitoba, I had the opportunity, or was approached by my family, my parents, to take over Wolverine Supplies, and that's where it brings me to today. Wolverine Supplies is a rural business. We're located in the country. We're not actually even in the community of Verdun itself. We have approximately 18 employees, and we service Canadian sports shooters, hunters, the law enforcement and military market from coast to coast with products to suit their needs. And when we talk about C-21 and the impact on our business, it's not made business a simple process. Outside of, we go back to the OIC, we had over 15 firearms listed. Then FRT changes by the RCMP in the months to follow added more firearms to the list. Now our industry is dealing with the ramifications of Bill C-21, the freeze on handgun transfers, in addition to the amendments that were just recently tabled and then removed. That doesn't even begin to start when you're dealing with in business, when you're dealing with your regular business issues, from supply, demand, product shortages, cost of shipping, overhead, staff, your typical business practices. Now we're all ever for wondering what the government's going to do next. Instead of improving the firearms industry, it seems to be that we're second guessing, and I don't believe it's doing anything to enhance Canadians' public safety at this time. The government has increased the uncertainty to the businesses across the country who are forever wondering if its products will be available to sell to their customers, what will happen next, what will be prohibited, what may not be prohibited, what's changing, what do they do with inventory. There's thousands of dollars. You talk about mental health and stress. Well, this is just compounded when all legitimate firearms owners and businesses, all they're trying to do is follow the laws as they're written today. In the meantime, then we have incidences like we heard of earlier, where we've got firearms being smuggled in the country, and those are the ones that are being primarily found on the streets and causing sources of our crime today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. We'll start our questionings now with Madame Dancho. 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to both witness groups for being here. Merci beaucoup à Kate et Martin d'être ici avec nous.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Des milliers de chasseurs
and there are we've been accused of disinformation about hunters and what they're trying to do by the government. What would you say? Well, with regard to the identification and classification, there are accusations of disinformation. We're looking at the actual definitions, which are very vague, which cover a lot of hunting weapons, and that's the problem. I don't know how much you know about firearms, for example. With the meeting, in a meeting with the minister, our association asked a very clear question: when you target detachable magazine weapons, is each magazine is there when you are using the weapon, but there are other magazines in other countries that have a higher capacity, and if, for example, a Browning or Remington Woodmaster was sold here in Canada with a magazine of 4 bullets only, it would be legitimate. And in the United States, there are 7 bullets. And that weapon, under this definition, since it's defined by the magazine, would be illegal. I think this is the type of question we ask the people in the government, and who don't really seem to be aware of these differences. And you've I think I've dealt with several hundred weapons during my career. What would the impact of the amendments on hunting rifles? Could you give me an example? In the definition, the list, the impact will be very extreme, and that's why we think there's a great deal of ignorance about these weapons and how or why they should be included in the list. The problem is the number of them. There are thousands of weapons that could be concerned, that are concerned, and for example, the issue of 5 bullets or more. And it would seem that there are people that aren't aware, even including Minister Mendicino, of these differences. These definitions, these lists cover a huge number of weapons. And my colleague may want to speak as well, but with regard to the hunters and fishers, and there's a great deal of weapons that can be described as accessible on the market and are very common, and there could be weapons that have been handed down from father to son, and there's also the issue that it's would be difficult to acquire new weapons if you don't inherit them, and there's a problem with regard to ammunition in Canada as well. And if somebody wants to purchase a weapon, they fight, and they might have great difficulty and have to abandon their livelihood. And thank you. This you say that you're I spoke with someone who was a member of your organization, and she talked to me. Can you refer to that? I think women are very aware of this file. They're very involved in hunting, and especially in recent years in Quebec, we have 24% of women who are involved in. And so the pandemic maybe increased the participation in our organization, and we don't have the latest figures for our federation, but there would be a tremendous impact because these women often have firearms, whether they've inherited them or they belong to their spouse, and there are problems with these different types of weapons, and they find that their weapons are on the list, and they're afraid that they might not be able to use them anymore. Thank you very much. I only have 30 seconds. Do you have anything else to add? Yes. Given our activities, we're often asked as hunters, and what about the legitimate use of sport weapons and hunting weapons, and what would be the effect of the application of these incoherent measures on us? And you can see, given the lists and the different the definitions, it's not only hunters but an entire community that will be affected. I think that it will be difficult, for example, to even have Olympic shooting teams, and sports shooters are also involved. Thank you very much.
Mr. Moff, 6 minutes, please.
Nur Mohammed.
I'm sorry, Mr. Nur Mohammed, 6 minutes. You can have the same 6 minutes.
Thank you very much. Just wanted to thank all of you for being here with us. I'd like to start, Mr. Hipwell, with you. One of the things that we've really what we are trying to do, though some, have spoken to the contrary, we are really trying to strike a balance here between what is important in terms of protecting victims and communities and making sure that our communities remain safe, and ensuring that Indigenous communities, hunters and farmers and Northern Canadians are not adversely, materially impacted from being able to go hunting and protecting their farms, so on and so forth. I wanted to just touch on a couple of things that you said. In your previous testimony, you had said that you don't believe that registering firearms reduces crime. Do you believe that any type of gun legislation or registering of guns is helpful, or do you think that we just should not be in the business of registering or legislating which guns should be on the street?
Good morning. When did I say that registering firearms would not make Canadians safer? I don't believe I said that this morning. Is that correct?
No, in your previous testimony.
My previous testimony from... What are you...
From 2018, your testimony in 2018, sir.
Oh, I didn't realize that we were having a discussion about that this morning.
Sir, I mean, anything that you have said is something that, is part of this important conversation. So I just wanted to clarify if you believe that to be true.
Could you give me the full context of my previous testimony? Because I don't recall that. That was over 4 years ago.
Your entire quote was, I do not believe that the registering of firearms will decrease crime. Criminals do not register their firearms. That point has been brought up in many avenues over the past while.
That's correct. We're talking about legal firearms owners here, and legal firearms who follow the laws as they're written today, the storage regulations, the transportation regulations, the safe handling and use of firearms.
But my question to you is, do you believe that any type of gun registry or gun legislation is important?
I believe that clear classification of firearms is important, and building a trust between firearms owners and the industry and the government is important, and not to be on an ever-changing scale here. We need clear and concise definitions.
Okay, so I want to just then chat about something that is on your website. One of the guns that you sell is called the Kel-Tec Sub 2000 Gen 2 Semi-Auto. It's currently a non-registered long gun, but it's advertised as being configured for use with Glock magazines in a 10-round capacity. There are gun enthusiasts who have reviewed this model. They call it the Home Defender. It's been called this outstanding choice for, quote, pistol caliber carbine for the critical role of a home defense gun. the Kel-Tec Sub 2008 grade carbine for carrying the vehicle for an emergency and practically an ideal home defense firearm. The 9mm isn't well suited to shooting or hunting, and it certainly isn't a varmint rifle. But what it can do, it does very well. Would you consider this to be a hunting gun, and do you think this is the type of gun that ordinary Canadians should own?
Is that, can I ask the source of that comment on that specific firearm? Like, where did that information come from?
This is coming from your website, sir. It's a gun that you sell.
Right, and my website clearly defines exactly what you read. Because I don't recall that off the top of my head.
My question to you is this, would you consider this to be a hunting gun?
In a certain application for varmint and predator control, yes, a Kel-Tec in that configuration is suited for varmint and predator control.
But it says that it's not for shooting or hunting. It isn't a varmint rifle. So I'm curious to understand how people that are using your gun, your website, assert that this is a gun that is not for hunting or particularly good at being a varmint rifle. So I'm just trying to help understand. So for the folks out there that are watching this who think that we are going after hunting rifles and guns that people ordinarily use for hunting, I'm struggling to understand how a gun that people who hunt say that this is actually not a gun for hunting or for varmints would somehow be a good hunting gun. So walk me through that.
Can you just repeat your question, please? Because what you're stating, I'm trying to source and find on my website, okay. So I have that as an exact reference, so I can respond appropriately.
Would you recommend this gun for someone that wanted to go hunting?
Yes, I said that someone who was looking at varmint or predator control, it would be a very viable option for them.
So okay. So, and on what basis would you make that assertion, given that the many reviews of this gun in the public domain from hunters say that this is not a gun that is particularly good for shooting or hunting and is not a varmint rifle? So I'm just curious how you make that determination.
Well, that determination is an opinion. It's an absolute.
Right, so I'm trying to ask how you reached that opinion, sir.
I just responded to you, sir, in saying that yes, it is an option for an individual who would choose to use it in the varmint or predator control.
Thank you, Mr. Mohammed. Madame Michaud, s'il vous plaît, 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. And thank you to the witnesses for being with us. Mr. Bouchard, you said that you're often traveling and you're in great contact with firearm owners, and a number of surveys have been made in recent years, according to which between 70% or more of Canadians, or rather owners, agree with the control of assault weapon type firearms. And do you think that that you don't really represent the majority of gun owners? Depends on the survey. I mean, the questions inform the response. We've just, with the questioning that we just heard, I think the information in the question changes everything. And I think any sampling, if people don't know what the definitions are, the definitions used by the government, and we don't know what an assault rifle is yet. And in some cases, there are guns that have been prohibited for 30 years. And I would say that you're quite right, that with the current sense of disinformation, Canadians tend towards the answer that you've just cited. So in these conditions, that's the case. So if firearms owners are not able to answer questions about firearms and choose which weapons from this list might be used for firearms. Well, first of all, I assume that a hunter is automatically somebody that is familiar with firearms, has to know. I would like to know what who were the sample. Well, I think that if that survey was made for firearms owners, it was firearms owners that were consulted with this survey. And we'll go on to another question. As president of Chasse and Pêche, you were also spokesperson for the Canadian Association of Firearms Owners, and you defend the interests of this organization. Yes, when I am the spokesperson, I am the liaison for Francophone members, and so I am an intermediary because there's a great deal of Anglophone participation, and when I need to assist a Francophone member, I provide that assistance. But the mission of this organization, I am not necessarily someone who has defined the general policy of the association, but I'm more the French liaison. And when, for example, I could be a spokesperson for the Bloc Québécois. I mean, when I give an opinion, it's the opinion that represents the Bloc Québécois and our values. And I think that if you are a spokesperson, so the legalization of all firearms, no categorization, elimination of limits on magazines, and limits on restrictions on how they are stored. I think, how do you think that could improve safety in Canada? I think that that's your definition. In my business, we are people who represent our business. A spokesperson like myself will brief individuals, provide them with information, and I think that that can be a spokesperson can be defined differently, not a representative. Yes, but you say that you are an expert in you do reviews of firearms, and have you targeted certain weapons that are used for hunting? I don't know what number. These are certainly market available weapons, and as I said, the Browning bar I gave as an example earlier. It's a semi-automatic weapon used in Canada. Also, the Remington 742 and 40 Woodmaster, which are very used in Canada, and I think and I think these are also guns that are available in other countries with larger magazines available as well. And in Canada, are there hunters who use firearms that are high-level Joule weapons? Yes, the Parker brothers, which are hunting rifles that there are 10,000 Joule or more for partridge. No. But I'm coming back to the beginning of your question about the barrel, and the second part concerning joules, the number of Joule. We take all the calibers of and especially, for example, with big game and so-called dangerous game. And I think that there's for example, for armor-piercing weapons or ammunition based on the number of joules. And I can tell you that for some animals, a high-power rifle is necessary, and I think that if we're going hunting to get food for our family, these are important weapons. Thank you very much, Mr. Boulris. 6 minutes. Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Chair. You know that, and since in my area, I represent Montrealers who are very worried about the safety of their children, and we've had incidents in Montreal, for example, the Polytechnique, but also in Quebec City, and the use of an IR-15 and a gun someone who killed people at the mosque in Quebec City, and they're also accessed by extremist and Islamophobic individuals. And I don't want to talk about whether or not you're a spokesperson and what your role is, but you seem to be just repeating messages that have been given to you. Do you think that you are the the francophone pole of the association? Yes, I think so, and so I think. And their position is very extreme. No rules, total freedom, and no owner permits, even rules on storage. Do you share this approach, these ideas? When you look at the context of each, for example, safe storage, we're talking about in isolated areas, defending your family against dangerous animals. Certainly, when we talk about restrictive measures that are for example, just just a person who has firearms. When you give the context of these issues, when we want to restrict the use or ownership, which we can say that I am in favor of anything that would reduce criminality, but I don't think it's necessary to register firearms for that, and I think it's not. This would be very negative for the industry, and so you don't agree with the legalization of all firearms. I don't have a list of all firearms, but certainly there are firearms that are reserved for military purposes or industrial uses that are not for individuals, and I think that's reflected by the association. You have to give me the context. For example, when you have with a barrel that has to be on the turret of a military vehicle. Certainly, we wouldn't need one of those, and I wouldn't say that I would want to have this type of a major weapon for hunting. So that's a rather extreme example, but that's an answer to the question. You talked in your presentation about for people who defend the use of firearms, and certainly in the NDP we believe in rights and believe in hunters that want to hunt and use hunting to feed their families. And with regard to mental health issues, do you not think that the availability of firearms would complicate the situation of someone who has a mental health problem? And if everything was available, and I think that's a societal problem of firearms. For Mr. Boucher, it's a serious issue, and I think that vehicles kill people. There are people who drown, and the coroners have said that same thing, and coroners have said that people who are in psychological distress, that's why we believe that we should deal with the problems, and we are for preventing and dealing with mental health problems so that there are not abuses of firearms. And I think that whether it be armed crime or other types of crime, I think there are other measures that would be better. For example, mental health treatment. But I think that someone who has a mental health crisis you say that he wouldn't be able to. He would have the ability to get a firearm if he wanted without having to get a permit. And I think that coroners have said no. No firearms controls would decrease the number of cases and use in crime. And I think that this would be a problem for me and for the people I represent, that there should be any piece of paper and some way of controlling our activities. And it's true that people in crisis will continue to commit crimes. And Mr. Bourget, the Canadian Firearms Association, is suggesting civil disobedience to even for obtaining military weapons. Do you agree with that kind of civil disobedience? I am not in favor of any proposal for civil disobedience, and I think that I would say so to the organization. So you would make that statement to the head of the association? Honestly, this kind of information is something that should be shared, and I would say that very clearly to the association. I would be against any civil disobedience. Thank you very much.
That wraps up our first round. We'll go to our second round. We'll have to abbreviate this round also, as we did before. 4 minutes for each of the Conservative and the Conservative and Liberal. 2 minutes for the NDP and the Bloc. Thank you all, and go ahead, Ms. Dancho.
Thank you,
4
Mr.
minutes,
Chair.
please.
I have a few questions for Mr. Hipwell concerning AR-10s. Can you explain in brief the relation between AR-10s and AR-15s? Is it a variant? Is it a bigger caliber? Just in brief.
The simplest way to explain an AR-10, it's in a larger caliber, most commonly in a .308 caliber.
Okay, so the AR-10, in layman's terms, has bigger bullets than an AR-15. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, and you'll recall that in May 2020, the May 2020 OIC, since that time, the Liberal government has used the AR-15 as the sort of poster child of what is a military-style weapon. I think that that's universally agreed. I don't think that's a controversial thing to say. But my understanding, and you can confirm this if you'd like, is that the AR-10, which is a variant, bigger bullet version of the AR-15, was used by the Yukon government. They bought a bunch of these after they were prohibited in the May 2020 OIC for their conservation officers because they were deemed as the best defense against wildlife. Do you recall this? I mean, there's news stories about it.
Yes, that's correct.
I think Ontario also has done this for their conservation officers. Is that your understanding?
Yes, correct. Ontario is also used as a similar firearm in that caliber.
Right, okay. So the Ontario and Yukon governments have decided that those firearms are the best defense against wildlife, which is interesting. Just moving on, I did want to ask you specifically about the definition given your technical expertise on firearms. Specifically in G4, in G, it says, I'm just going to read it out for the record, a firearm that is a rifle, and this is going to be prohibited. This is sort of the big issue in addition to the list. A firearm that is a rifle or shotgun that is capable of discharging centerfire ammunition in a semi-automatic manner that is designed to accept a detachable cartridge magazine with a capacity greater than 5 cartridges of a type for which the firearm was originally designed. Can you think of any semi-automatic centerfire rifles that have a magazine that's exclusively 5 or less? Like, is that a common firearm? Basically what I'm asking is there going to be a lot of semi-automatic centerfire rifles with magazine capability or capacity left after these are prohibited as per this definition?
Very few from my understanding, and just on that I'm familiar with, there's a Browning Model 1900, a Ruger 44 Deerfield, and the first Browning BARs, which is a common semi-automatic hunting rifle. The Mark I would fall into that category only. Those are the only few that I am aware of.
Okay. Thank you very much. So a very limited number would not be included in this. So for all intents and purposes, this definition, according to your expertise, which is second generation, and you have policing expertise, you've trained others on how to use firearms, you are a firearm retailer, second generation. This definition, for all intents and purposes, bans semi-automatic centerfire rifles that have magazine capabilities.
Correct.
Correct. Okay. I also had a question about, there's been a number thrown around by the Liberal government regarding 19,000 available firearms. I have a lot of confusion about this since this list that they've provided is not complete. Actually, the experts that came to the table said that it is not complete. In fact, when I asked them about that definition I just read out to you, I said, where's the list for these? Because it's not included in this 300 pages. They said that they didn't have one. So there is actually no list available that the bureaucrats who wrote this have. So there's actually unknown. The government does not know how many exist that they are banning. So I find it difficult to understand. You know firearms really well. What are your thoughts?
It's interesting that they said that there's a number left. If they can't, what's left? Are they all available? If those are all the options available for Canadian hunters, sport shooters, farmers, legitimate legal firearms owners, well, what are they? Are they all available in Canada?
Right. And just with my last moment here, the 10,000 joules, my understanding is guns that are not designed to do 10,000 joules can if you put enough gunpowder in them. Is that correct? So guns that could be caught under this definition of what's prohibited may be caught just because in an extreme circumstance they could be forced to do 10,000 joules. Is that correct?
That's correct. If something was, if increased amount of powder in, a different weight or type of bullet was used, yes, many other calibers could create
ones that aren't listed yet. Yeah, correct. Ones that aren't listed. Okay.
Absolutely.
So, thank you very much, Mr. Hipwell.
Merci.
Thank you very much.
4 minutes, please.
Thank you. I didn't have an opportunity on the last panel just to clarify the Canadian Femicide Observatory. There were some questions as to validity of research that they do. And I just want to put on the record, it is a very well-respected, nonpartisan organization that was established in 2017 at the University of Guelph. I actually get their monthly newsletter. I encourage anyone watching to sign up for it. But it's an interdisciplinary, multi-sectoral panel of experts from across the country. And one of their objectives was the need for a single location for justice and accountability for femicide victims in Canada. So given the rise of femicides in our country, I think it's important that this organization exists and also provides information for us. So now turning to you, Monsieur Bourget, there's been a fair amount of conversation about you being a spokesperson for the National Firearms Association. I'm happy to hear that you don't agree with their comments about mass non-compliance. Something else that I know they post about and feel strongly about is that citizens should be armed for self-defense. How do you feel about that?
Well, je pense que c'est...
I think that this idea is one that comes from the American Association, not the Canadian branch, and I think that it's true.
Absolutely comes from the Canadian National Firearms
Oui, il y a des relations qui...
Yes, it comes from the... it is, and there have been analysis, and in order to better deal with the situation in Canada, the example was made on the issue of open carry or concealed carry, that there was adoption of that, as we can see in an association like the NFA, there are some who will be in favor of certain measures and others will not be. It's true that there are some.
Executive director posts quite often.
Oui.
One of them with a picture of me clutching pearls, women with firearms. So whenever I do bring up femicides, implying that I would be able to protect myself if I only had a firearm. So do you agree with that kind of mentality?
Je suis...
I agree with the type of comparison being made to show the decentralized way this firearms file is being managed. I think that comparison comes from a very situation and the saying, there's nothing better than a good man with a gun to defend against a bad man with a gun. That comes from the United States, and I agree with this comparison of this theory in the context of trying to control firearms, but it doesn't really protect American cities.
Thank you, Ms. Demoff. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the witness for being here today. I just wanted to bring your attention to a website in the USA, Gun Violence Archive, which posts that up to date, they have 71 mass shooting in the U.S., right? And out of which 106 people have been killed from that website. And as far as I can see, the last mass shooting we had in Canada was in York Region, in Vaughan, in December of 2022, where 5 people were killed in Canada. I just want to bring that to your attention, this comparison between the U.S. and Canada. And my background as a police officer for 28 years, where I worked frontline as an officer. And I have come across, I have worked on homicides, I have worked on suicides, and I worked on many, many shootings. To me, as far as I'm concerned, every loss of life is a huge loss. So, I mean, I understand we respect the rights of hunters, sports shooters, indigenous people for hunting, and the airsoft community. But, you know, what we're looking at doing is we're looking at preventing further deaths of innocent people, and I think that we should be looking at this more clearly. I understand your rights as hunters and sports shooters, but we also have to look at the rights of Canadians, average Canadians like myself and my family.
Thank you, Mr. Chang.
We want to make sure we keep all of us safe. Thank you.
Quick response, if you wish.
I totally agree. Et ce qui me fait peur, c'est
What I'm afraid of is that you have called on experts and you could have gotten more experts with better tools, and you spent a lot of time trying to deal poorly with this issue of protecting Canadians. I don't know. I think you could have other experts and better experts, but I think this is not the way to do it to protect Canadians. And this could be a difficult way of protecting citizens. Ms. Michaud, 2 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair. Mr. Bourget, the process that we're undertaking here is to have consultations to allow interested parties to make themselves heard. So we want to know what are the issues, and we can read about them and hear about them. And what should we do? What should we do better the next time? And earlier, you're talking about firearms that are in the list. I spoke very clearly about the Parker brother and the Browning bar. But that's maybe useful for a polar bear in the north. But you're talking about a 3,000 joule Lee Enfield, and I think that I know you're an expert, but I think that you're using the same type of technique when you say that you're not really a spokesperson. But you're a spokesperson for an association that is against any control on firearms, and I think that's maybe we could do things differently or better. But I think that if I understand, you just want to throw all controls in the garbage, and I will look at the video. And when you asked the question, I gave you examples of firearms when you asked about 10,000 joule. That's the example I gave you. I was very clear. These are firearms that are, we still have a lot of firearms that are on the list. And when you use this kind of definition and this kind of list, I think it's essential that a lot of experts be called in. There's a lot of poor information and missing information, and my problem is about how doable these measures will protect Canadians in the street. We've seen. I'm finished. Thank you, Chair. And now, Mr. Boulouris. Thank you very much, Chair. And I'd just like to say that I'm somewhat frustrated with Mr. Bourget's attitude towards some of the members of the committee, and how many types of firearms in your inventory would be banned by the changes we're proposing, Mr. Hipwell?
If we go back to the order in council starting there, we're talking about quantity-wise, hundreds of firearms in total and many different models across the board. The government said at the time, well, you can dispose of them. Well, there's a lot of other complications with that. Once they're imported into a country, they can't be just simply exported back to the originating country. There's a lot of other rules that the government obviously overlooked and felt that was simple to pass on to the businesses.
Donc, Monsieur Hipwell, si
Mr. Hipwell, if you lose tens or hundreds of firearms and then therefore hundreds of clients, and since you're a firearms dealer, when we talk about controlling semi-automatic and assault weapons, would it be a great cost for you since that's your business after all?
A business. We're talking about.
Mais est-ce que vous n'êtes pas en conflit d'intérêts?
Are you not in a position of conflict of interest?
How am I in a position of conflict of interest?
Puisqu'on parle d'interdire certains potentiellement.
When we talk about banning some firearm types that are part of your inventory, so you have a financial interest in having the least controls possible.
I didn't say anything.
Excusez-moi.
I believe that Mr. Boulerice is making a pretty significant accusation. Perhaps he can clarify if he's suggesting that small businesses impacted by the four bans actually brought forward by this government, that those businesses do not deserve to be consulted in a public way. Can he confirm that that's what he's doing, or is he making a legal accusation?
Not a point of order, I believe. Mr. Boulerice can ask his questions, reasonable questions, and Mr. I'm sorry, Hipwell will have a chance to respond. So I believe your question has been asked, Mr. Chair. Mr. Hipwell, if you'd like to respond, please go ahead.
I'll do my best because I do not feel I'm in this is a conflict of interest here. I am here to speak on behalf of all firearms owners, firearms retailers, about the classifications and the proposed legislation here. Yes, just because my business sells those types of firearms, I'm not the only business field that sells those types of firearms. And I believe that if the government was more open to working with the industry, this legislation and the firearms community would be much further ahead. However, the firearms industry and community seems to be blacklisted. It's been a challenge for organizations to work with the government in order to come with common sense, simple firearms legislation that works for the firearms owners, the retailers, the industry, the manufacturers, the importers, and the government, and in turn will enhance Canadians' public safety. That's where I believe we feel the government has fallen short. So to think, sir, that I am in a conflict of interest, no, I'm here representing many hundreds and thousands of Canadians.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Merci, Monsieur Boulerice.
Thank you very much, Mr. Boulerice.
Panel and our questions, and thank you all. Thank our witnesses for your expertise and your time today. And it's been a big help to our study. And with that, we are adjourned.